Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Tod Stillson. He's a family physician and entrepreneur. He's the author of the book, Doctor Incorporated: Stop the Insanity of Traditional Employment and Preserve Your Professional Autonomy. Today's Kevin MD article is Systemic Collusion: How Big Business and Government Herd Physicians into Traditional Employment. Tod, welcome back to the show.
Kevin, it's great to be back with you and to be a part of your audience. I love what you do here.
All right. So, before talking about your most recent article, just what led you to write it in the first place?
Well, I think the one of the challenges that we have in medicine today is that there's a lot of things that are going on if you look at things from the 20,000 foot view. And oftentimes we lose sight of those things because we're down in the trenches doing
Yeah.
the work every day. And it's easy to forget really what these other forces are going on around us. And so it was just sort of a revisit of a bigger subject.
All right, perfect. So, of course, one of those 20,000 foot view items is big business and government herding
Yeah.
physicians, as you say, into traditional
Yeah.
employment. So,
Hmm.
let's define some terms here before we go into your article. What do you
Yeah.
define as traditional employment?
Traditional employment is really what the majority of doctors are doing right now, which is you receive a W-2 paycheck from a corporate employer of some type who pays you for your professional services, and they take care of the rest. Basically, you do your work and you get a paycheck.
All right, and you're right. That is the majority of physicians today. So, talk about some of these outside influences that are making that happen.
Well, I think we all recognize, and some of us at various levels of frustration over it, that there are larger forces that have entered in and really taken over the world of medicine and the business of medicine. And there's several forces involved, and I think there are four primary forces that we have to talk about. One of which is the big business of medical education. So medical education is a whole space as its own sort of entity in the process. There's the IRS or the federal government. There's also the large healthcare corporations and private equity groups that are controlling the marketplace. And then, of course, there's us and our role in that. So all four forces sort of interplay with one another and affect this space of how we feel like we're either in control of it or out of control of it.
And you talk about these four entities that are influencing physicians to
Mhm.
traditional employment. What's in it for them? Why do they want physicians to be traditionally employed?
Yeah, that's a fair question. We could get into a whole conspiracy hole of entities working together to, keep physicians under control. I think each one of them has their own built-in incentive tree that sort of influences the process. If I were to say the big business of medical education has to do with growing their footprint and their influence through healthcare, and we all see the big departments, the large buildings that are going up, and all the faculty being paid for, and
Mhm.
really a whole bunch of plans that at the end of the day for a poor medical student is kind of coming in on our back. And what those that big business of medical education understands is that doctors can get loans. And so they're going to up the price for the cost of being a part of their program, knowing that behind the scenes, that's not going to be an impairment for the doctor, the pre-doctor to be a part of their program. It actually just means that they're going to have to get larger loans. So it's kind of almost like a pass through, get to your money so that they can fuel their
Sure.
business education corporate plan, right? Now, for the federal government, we all know because we have an election cycle going on right now, they're very interested in our tax dollars, right?
Yeah.
And they've all been, especially one side, very clear about the fact that they're going to target people who make more than $400,000 a year or high income. And they prefer those high income earners to be W-2 earners because, frankly, you don't have a lot of latitude in what you can do to
Mhm.
reduce that tax burden. And then in terms of the corporatization of healthcare, well, we all know that we are basically commodities in the process for them. In the big picture, our physician labor is just a commodity for them to manage, just like patients are a commodity for them to manage. And they take those two elements along with some third party payments and they put it all through their business metric to earn money. Okay. And so we just become sort of impersonally commoditized in the system. So those large corporations can do well from a profit standpoint. So those are really, I think, the kind of in general reasons behind those forces. They're not really, I think, working in unison,
Mhm.
but they do play off one another a little bit. As an example, I would say physicians come out of their medical training with large debts, right? So, what would a large healthcare corporation want to do to sort of pull you into their harbor? They're going to provide financial incentives for you to become a traditional employee with them that they can control and manage as a commodity the most effectively. So they know you are in a vulnerable position financially, so they're there to sort of meet that need, but in the process you give up a lot downstream related to that. So they are colluding it kind of overtly, but
Mhm.
indirectly they interconnect.
And you mentioned that fourth group, which is physicians themselves, right?
Yeah,
So
yes.
there is a group of physicians, some would say the majority, who would prefer traditional employment. Is that what you're
Yeah.
alluding to?
Yeah, I prefer, I don't know if I would say prefer. I would say they're conditioned to expect that to be the norm. Now, and so is that preferred? I don't know. We are so used to as physicians, whether it be our pre-med training, our med training, or
Hmm.
even residency, kind of being told this is the way it is, this is what you do, we're conditioned to follow. And in that conditioning process, whether it be the medical education world or even the healthcare marketplace, we are conditioned to believe that traditional employment is really the only way to survive or to do well because of its simplicity, but because the marketplace is too strenuous, too difficult, too challenging. You don't want to have to manage a corporation or try and compete with
Hmm.
the large groups. And so I don't know if I think we're kind of herded into the belief of being conditioned. So that lack of business education. So in other words, medical education doesn't provide us with business education
Yeah.
anymore, right? Is that on purpose? Well, there's so much competing with our time. I don't know if it's in person on purpose, but it does get pushed off to the side. Do the corporate people, the corporate employers want us to have business education? Well, probably not because, they don't want us to be empowered to leave them. They would rather us be empowered to stay with them. Does the federal government want us to look as ourselves as small businesses rather than employees? And they like small business, but frankly, they like the tax dollars that comes from us
Hmm.
being W-2 employees. So we're sort of indirectly influenced by these powers to just think, well, status quo is, easiest is, I should just be an employee. But my point is that there are other options available to doctors, and we need to think about those and think for ourselves. This is about empowering doctors. And the reason I wrote the article is I believe every physician needs to be empowered to think for themselves. If you think about it and you work your way through it, and you're like, yeah, I just prefer to be a traditional employee,
Hmm.
simpler, easier. I think a majority of people will land in that spot. However, I think there's a lot of people that are in this space where they didn't really think about it.
Yeah.
And so they're not proactive about it. They're just passive about it. I'm just trying to encourage doctors to be active so they can take control of their future and take control of their professional life and not passively give it to control over all of these forces. And I believe these forces indirectly and directly influence the burnout crisis, the sense of doctors feeling powerless in the system. And really the best way for us to regain our power and to get out of this whole stupid cycle of burnout is to empower ourselves to have autonomy.
And I think we mentioned this on a prior show. Whenever you would go to a medical school to talk about some of these alternative pathways, you wouldn't always be encouraged to do that, right?
Absolutely not. Those forces again sort of have filters about what they want those that they're influencing to hear and to receive. And that's a good example. Those filters are placed on each one of those entities in terms of how they want us to be conditioned. And again, message from me to your listener, if you're a physician listening to this, don't just passively let yourself be conditioned to believing that this is the only way. There are plenty of other options.
So how does one go about breaking that conditioning? How can you unlearn the conditioning from medical training that a traditional employment model, a W-2 model, is the only way?
I think information and inspiration are two elements that we can go about doing that. Just like we tend to come out financially illiterate, tend to come out business illiterate. And so how can you correct that? Well, physicians love to learn. They love to read. They love to hear podcasts like yours and listen and explore. So, make it your intentional effort to read a book, to sign up for a blog like Simply MD, where I'm sending out a blog post on self-employment and
Hmm.
independence every day. And you just sort of begin to see how, through examples and stories, how other people are doing it. Another way is to identify a mentor, somebody that you maybe see in the marketplace who is a physician who's managed to remain independent, and spend some time with them, find out how it's working, what they're doing, how that process is going on for them. So it really comes down to building our own sense of competency. It has to be come from within. Your employer's not going to say to you, hey, I think you need some business education.
Yeah.
Let me give you some resources for that. No, the Fed's not going to do it. Medical education system not going to do it. You have to do it yourself. So be empowered yourself to identify these resources for financial literacy and business literacy, and read books, find mentors, and find people that can inspire you.
Now, how did you forge your own pathway? So, if you listen to our previous episodes, for
Hmm.
listeners who aren't familiar with your path, you are not obviously traditionally employed. Were you at one point, and how did you unlearn that traditional thinking and forge your own path?
Yeah, so I was traditionally employed for about 15 years, so I do have a compare and contrast experience with this, and that's one of the reasons I developed Simply MD as sort of a messaging community for doctors to know that there are alternatives. Because for the past decade, Kevin, I've worked as an independent physician, employed by a large hospital system still, but in really what's called an employment light agreement, and
Mm.
your listeners can look that up on your website. We've had some conversations about that, but in essence, that's I've worked as an independent contractor. Now, how did I arrive there? Is because I didn't have the awareness, business awareness, having been a traditional employee and been like the rest of you, to know that was an option. I sought out business consultants in the healthcare community who exposed me to the opportunity
Mhm.
there. Once I become aware of it and followed their advice and counsel, that's when I transitioned to becoming an independent physician and begin the journey. Okay. I mean, like, I remember I was anxious about it, to be very honest, when I made that transition because I knew so little. I didn't feel like I knew was prepared for it. But like a lot of things, sometimes you just jump in, you learn as you go. And really, it took a couple of years for me to really get my mind wrapped around the process of being a micro corporation and operating a business entity. And as I've done it, I've realized, I've done this.
Mhm.
Lots of other doctors can do this. This is not rocket science, so to speak. It is not overtly complicated. You just have to make the initiative and take the dive in and do it. And I try and provide a host of resources and products and courses for doctors on Simply MD to help facilitate that and make it easier for them.
So, with these larger forces, I would say, influencing physicians' decisions when it comes to their career, is there room today for independent practitioners, for practitioners who want to do similar arrangements to what you have? Is there room for them?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I really see a movement going on through my work with Simply MD, physicians sort of beginning to navigate in that direction of choosing rather than to be traditionally employed. Here's what happens. First of all, you have a small subset that come out of their training as attendings and they're like, yeah, I want to be independent. They know that from the beginning. That's small. But here's the more common scenario. After 3 to 5 years of working as a traditional employee, a lot of doctors go, I don't really care for this. I
Yeah.
don't want to do this. And they begin looking for alternative spaces. And that's what we're seeing in the marketplace, whether it be telehealth, whether it be direct primary care, whether it be concierge medicine, whether it be all sorts of contracting options like employment like I do, whether it be locums. We're seeing this growth that has traditionally been in the 5 to 10% range. Now it's shooting more into the 15 to 20% range. And that's not to say even and not to ignore private practice, so
Mhm.
group private practice still is an option in places, although more challenged at times, but it's still an option. So there are all sorts of options and opportunities that continue to grow. We are in a high demand professional service, and there is no sort of resolution of it. There's a big gap between what is needed for professional services and how many of us are doing it. So that demand's only going to grow. The opportunities are only going to become more diverse, and so yeah, very much there's huge opportunities that exist today.
We're talking to Tod Stillson. He's a family physician and entrepreneur. Today's KevinMD article is Systemic Collusion, How Big Business and Government Herd Physicians into Traditional Employment. Todd, as always, will end with your take-home messages to the KevinMD audience.
Yeah, my message is take back control of your professional life. You are not powerless. You don't have to be complicit. You don't have to be passive. You have the power to take care of your own professional life. And I recommend you not depend on a large employer to control your career, but you take control of it yourself and enter the marketplace as a self-employed independent doctor. There's many options available to you for that today, and I don't want you to ignore that as an option.
Todd, as always, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. And thanks again for coming back on the show.
It's great to be with you, Kevin. Thank you.